I suppose it would be useful for you to have those slides to pull out of. We're going to talk through some different approaches and some different ways that we kind of might think about raising awareness. And we're going to talk about some of the key messages that we kind of distill kind of awareness raising down to Answer Cancer. So at the end of this session, it's a kind of a quick session, hopefully you will have a bit of an idea of some different ways to raise awareness. Some of the different toolkits or tools or resources that are kind of out there to support you as well. Everything you see on screen, so we will send out all of this as a slide deck for you. And again, you know, it's about 60 slides in total. We don't expect you to use them all, but you know, they are there for you to pull out as you kind of want. Because it's a quite shorter session, that means where we'd usually spend some time doing kind of group work or group discussion, that's going to be a little bit limited, but still, if anybody has any contributions or kind of any questions, you know, to break up my voice, it would be really good to kind of hear those. So feel free as well to kind of, you know, to either ask questions or to contribute some of your own experience as well. So my kind of first kind of top tip, if you like, I usually at this point kind of introduce one of my colleagues. So we don't have kind of a little helper this time round, but my first kind of top tip, whatever kind of awareness session activity you're doing, it always helps to have somebody else there with you, whether that's kind of online in the background, especially managing kind of chat box or things like that, or whether it's kind of face-to-face. And that, you know, that quite often with awareness raising sessions, or it's not unusual for kind of somebody for lots of different reasons to kind of need a bit of extra attention. So your kind of helper can kind of deal with that person. They can deal with practical things in the room as well. So that's kind of my first top tip, which kind of isn't happening kind of so far. We always start off with some guidelines, which are kind of virtual. I've spent so much of my kind of recent kind of work time kind of facilitating and running training or kind of awareness raising sessions about kind of cancer and kind of cancer screening. And quite often they kind of are really engaging sessions when you kind of give people kind of space and opportunity to kind of talk about things. People often kind of talk as well. So it's good to ask questions. Grab a pen and paper if you kind of want to. I can see Roxana's kind of scribbling away, which is kind of really good. If you kind of want to make notes, then kind of please do that. We would usually start off with an icebreaker. I'm not going to do an icebreaker this time round, just kind of in terms of kind of timing, but I will ask kind of people in the room, has anyone got a favorite icebreaker that they want to share now? Has anyone got a really good one they use?
Is it the one with the pizza with or without pineapple? And then it causes a strong reaction.
What a really simple but really kind of effective one, right? So you just ask people to vote with or without. Yeah, that's a really good one. I like it. I tend to use polls. So if you're familiar with using Zoom, and we don't go into it kind of here, but I kind of tend to use polls to set up, and I think that's a really kind of good one to slip in there: pizza with or pizza without kind of pineapple. So I kind of mentioned first off that I spend a lot of my time talking about cancer. And one of the reasons why quite often, if you give people kind of space in a room or a session, and even if that's kind of a public facing stall kind of awareness raising session, and people come with an awful lot of experiences and come with a lot of ideas, and they are really good to talk and share. And obviously we kind of work with cancer champions, and cancer champions come with their own experiences. It's not uncommon for people in a room, kind of, you know, like a good example myself, to have not kind of taken up an offer for screening. So kind of in a room, we might have people who've never gone for the cervical screen for their smear test. So somebody who can share their experience can be kind of really positive as well. Creating spaces as well and talking about experiences, it's a good place to debunk myths and to kind of give facts as well. Now, we don't expect you to know everything. I don't know everything, and it's kind of quite fine to say to people in a room, I'll go and check that out as well. So that's another kind of good reason to kind of have a helper as well. The key messages I'm going to share with you today, we've got 3 key messages that we kind of use across Answer Cancer. And if you kind of stick or remember those key messages, I think you kind of won't go far wrong as well. So it's about keeping the message simple. And kind of overall, it's a really positive message. I was once accused of being quite evangelical about cancer screening in one of my sessions once. And I don't know about that, but kind of the simple message around kind of early detection and cancer screening is that it saves lives. So there's a guy called Mike Richards who was the cancer czar, and kind of looking at all the available evidence, what he found was that if we in the UK get as good as the European average at getting people into services, we will save 5,000 lives every year. If we get better than the European average, it's about 10,000 lives. And that's kind of year on year on year. So I think that's kind of a really positive message that we can kind of use as a starting point and share with other people as well. So you can have a bit of fun talking about cancer, which might seem a bit counterintuitive sometimes, but kind of we can share and start those messages and raise awareness in quite creative ways. So I'm going to quickly skip over Answer Cancer because you've been involved in the grants kind of application process. If you've got any questions about Answer Cancer, then by all means, kind of shout out. But we at kind of Answer Cancer, we're concerned predominantly with cancer screening. So that's the National Cancer Screening Programs. And our focus is predominantly working with community and voluntary sector organisations. So hence kind of you people in the room. If you haven't found it so far, the website, we've kind of got two front doors into our website. So the front door that's probably most appropriate for you is the Cancer Champion website, which you can kind of see from that little screenshot up there. It kind of tells you a bit about Answer Cancer. It's got all of our training resources as well. It's kind of got news and kind of updates, and it tells you about events. So that's probably the first place I would go to look for kind of resources. If you haven't signed up organisationally as kind of cancer champions, then I think that's part of your grant conditions. And kind of effectively what that means at its most simple is that you'll get the newsletter sent out to you as well. So anybody in the organisation who wants to be kept up to date, sign up as a cancer champion and you will receive our regular newsletter as well. And also kind of, updates about kind of what's coming up. So first bit I'm going to start off with, and this is kind of really to get you kind of thinking about kind of context and kind of resource. So it's thinking about kind of and planning an awareness session. So I would usually do this as a bit of a group work, but I'm going to throw it out to you kind of for just a couple of minutes. And I'd just like you to start thinking about audience, venue, time and resource. And so the different things to consider when raising awareness. So if you can kind of have a think about audience, for example, what different things might you need to consider when you're planning an awareness raising activity? Ditto for time, ditto for venues. What are some of the different issues you might need to consider?
Of the group, kind of the screening that you're going to talk about, is it relevant to the group that you're inviting?
Very good point. Yeah. So what's your audience like? It's kind of that first thing. Are they the right age group for kind of invitation? Is the topic you're going to be talking about kind of relevant to them? Or is that audience, are you going to treat them like a secondary audience? So people who might go out and spread the message to others. And that's a legitimate part of awareness raising. So that's one thing for audience. Has anyone got any things to think about you might need to consider with venue?
I just wrote down about like if it's local, if it's easy to access. Obviously we're a disability friendly service, so we'd have to make sure that it's somewhere that a lot of our services could go to or have access to. Yeah.
So accessibility of venue, kind of what's that venue like? Are you going to be stuck at the back of a cafe with lots of hustle and bustle and kind of footfall, or is it going to be kind of a classroom style thing? Is your awareness raising going to be out, public facing in the community, or are we going to be in lockdown or some kind of social distancing restrictions? So do you need to think about whether that's kind of online or not? So that's brilliant, really good kind of examples there. What about time? So thinking about kind of timing and things like that.
Being aware of, pick up the school run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really kind of good one. So it's that kind of 3 o'clock till 3:30 is kind of a consideration for kind of lots of us as well. Time of year, kind of maybe another one. So
Weather.
yeah, weather as well. And kind of all of those things can either work in your favor or against them. So one of the activities we sometimes do with groups is we ask people to think of a timeline across, your local community. And this is a wonderful one to do with Jewish communities, because, my goodness, kind of all kind of the different festivals and kind of faith days and kind of feasts and things provide lots of lovely opportunities. And it's, it's the same Christmas kind of, holiday seasons, are there kind of cancer themes. So it's not just the time of day, but it kind of, what's going on in the rest of the year. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to flick to the next slide, and I'll just kind of really quickly kind of bring up some of the other ones that I kind of thought about under each of those. So we've touched upon audience. We've touched upon kind of time as well, but also some very practical considerations like, time to set up, time to deliver. One of the key ones, my colleague Khaled, who's in the room, Khaled's our evaluation worker. And one of the things he'll be keen to do is he's delivering training to help you think about how you evaluate or report on your grant activity. So it's a very simple thing, but build in time to evaluate. So if you've got an hour session, or if you're running a stall or whatever it is, think about keeping some of that so you can do whatever evaluation activity you're going to do. Venue, we kind of touched a little bit on those as well. And then the kind of, by last but kind of no means least as well, we kind of talked about we talked about resources. So helper, equipment. One of the things I have kind of in my office, I have what's called a kit box. So I have with me a box that I take to kind of, awareness raising or training sessions, which kind of has all the backup stuff that might be useful. I once did some training in Scotland. No, it was an awareness raising session in Scotland, and the project manager there opened a bag and pulled out gaffer tape, and she used that to kind of stick down some leads. And I remember thinking at the time, you're the best prepared project manager I've ever seen. So, kind of learn from that, and kind of, it's about being prepped, isn't it, for sessions? So all of those things are kind of really important. The other thing I thought I'd kind of put in there, and you touched upon this, Roxana, about your target audiences as well. I don't know how much detail you've gone into in your kind of applications about who you're targeting, or whether you said, we'll be engaging some of our, BME communities with kind of learning disabilities, for example. But even within kind of those communities, it's probably worthwhile having a bit of a think about kind of narrowing that down to either people who are most at risk, or people where we know, or communities where we know uptake is lowest. So really, two simple ones are, like, for example, we know that typically with bowel cancer screening, men in particular are less likely to take up their invite. So you're kind of already identifying there maybe a big community who are at higher risk or who uptake less. For cervical screening, we know across Greater Manchester, and it's a national thing as well, more younger women on less younger women are taking up their invite. So again, if you're doing work around cervical screening, it might be good for you to think about targeting in on younger women in particular. So which networks are you going to use? How do you target younger women in particular? And it's kind of, it's even down to, for example, we know kind of our data will tell us that within specific localities that there are, I've called them hotspots, but there are particular localities where uptake might be lower. So I know off the top of my head, for example, that in Manchester, which has a lower uptake than some other parts of Greater Manchester, within Manchester, there are localities that, where uptake is even lowest. So Hume is one example of several. So where you've kind of got, where you're thinking about working across a big area, are there opportunities to target your awareness raising with particular communities of geography or of interest? Now, we can help you with that as well, because I know it's sometimes hard to hone in, but we can kind of help you with that. So that's kind of the first thing about kind of targeting. So we're kind of doing some of that prep and doing some of that thinking about how we might plan kind of our work, the next set of slides, we're going to kind of flick through some different approaches about kind of content and different ways you might kind of think about awareness raising. So is that okay, kind of that first bit? We move on to the second bit. Grand, right? Got some kind of nods there. So when I'm kind of thinking of awareness sessions, kind of, you know, there are kind of some kind of key topics that we may or may not include. First kind of topic is, what is cancer? And there are kind of 4 ways that kind of I talk with groups that they might want to think about kind of using this as an awareness raising activity. And we'll go through kind of each of those kind of, and you know, some of these will be more appropriate for some settings. So it's a bit like having a toolkit that you can pull out tools to use. So the first one, just a group activity. And you can get really fancy with this and create kind of word clouds if you're doing it kind of online. But at its kind of most simple, kind of in your kind of session with your group, get people to break into pairs and just ask them, you know, can you kind of think about cancer and come up with some words that you associate with it? And get people to then come back and talk. And with any activity, if you get people to do it in pairs, what you're doing is kind of giving them space to kind of talk without having to do it in a big group. So that's kind of a really simple way to kind of talk about cancer. And then you can kind of talk about, you know, whether people have particular associations with it. You can kind of maybe kind of challenge or reframe things, but it's just kind of getting it kind of out in the open. That's kind of a good one. Second way of doing it is a bit of a talk from the front. So it's kind of a little bit like what we're kind of doing today. And kind of this is kind of my most simple way of kind of, you know, talking about cancer with groups, introducing it as kind of a topic. And I kind of just very simply kind of talk about our bodies being made up of cells. Cells get instructions to replicate and divide. And sometimes this goes wrong. So those cells might replicate and divide too fast, and that causes what we call a tumor. Doctors then can check if that's kind of cancer. And that's the most simple way that I've kind of introduced kind of cancer, kind of what it is, because sometimes we get some communities kind of having those very negative connotations, almost thinking that you get it kind of by bumps and knocks. That's something my mum used to tell me, kind of if I hit my brother, he'd get cancer. So things like, you know, myths like that can be kind of quite pervasive. The kind of third kind of way of doing it is, all of that is available on a video, and I'm kind of not going to share that video today, but this is from Macmillan Cancer Support, and in your slide deck I've included a link to that kind of video as well. And you know, if you're showing it through kind of a presentation, you can do it. You can show it on phones. So I've done groups where I've shared videos on a tablet, on an iPad, or I've shared it kind of on a phone as well. So, you know, don't think that you need to set up in a classroom environment when you're doing this. You can kind of quite often kind of be kind of quite rough and ready as well. And another way I've done it, doesn't work with videos. I've also kind of printed out, if you like, kind of facts or kind of figures or statements on sheets of paper. So almost you're kind of doing a bit of a, you know, a presentation, but you've got the paper in front of you rather than a slide deck. So I did that a few weeks ago with a men's shed in Hume, where we were stood around the woodwork table. So you can adapt this awareness raising, and you know, don't feel afraid to kind of adapt it to different settings. So I'm not going to go through that one, but I will spend a quick time, because it's nice and interactive, on a quiz. Quizzes should be your fallback, and we've got lots of quizzes for all of the cancer screening kind of programs that you can just pick up and use. I'll tell you where later. Quizzes are a good fallback. If technology fails, they're interactive, they're engaging. You should have your answers kind of there and then, so you're kind of always prepared. So I'm going to do this with kind of you guys. Cancer can happen to anybody. So you can either do a thumbs up, or you can kind of nod, and I'll kind of bring it up so I can see you all. So cancer can happen to anybody. True or false?
True.
True?
True.
True. And we kind of talk about, and these figures are from CRUK, which is a fab resource. So we talk about 1 in 2 people will be affected by cancer across their lifetimes. About 10 years ago, when I first started doing this, we used to talk about 1 in 3. So that's kind of 1 in 2. So cancer tends to affect us more when we get older, so your risk of cancer increases with age. So most cancers, 90%, will happen to people age 50 or older. So that kind of again gives you, when we talked about targeting communities, that gives you another nod of the kind of communities you might want to be targeting. Obviously, that's not true with all the screening programs. Some of the screening programs invites are for younger people. Any ideas why that's kind of gone from 1 in 3 to 1 in 2? Any ideas for that?
They're diagnosing more.
Yeah.
Able to spot them more.
Yeah. So two reasons in particular. One is that more of us are living longer. So that's a good thing. So the more of us who are living longer, the more of us who are hitting kind of that ages where cancer or risk of cancer increases. And then diagnosis, we're getting better at getting people into the system and diagnosing cancer. So that's kind of two good reasons. Cancer can be prevented, true or false?
False. True.
In some cancers, in some ways.
Right.
Yeah. It's a half and half on that.
So kind of half and half. So you're kind of right in terms of it works differently for different cancers. As kind of a catch-all, we kind of tend to say that, yeah, some cancers can be prevented, and kind of our ability to prevent cancer for some cancers is kind of increased. So CR UK again, so they estimate 38% of cancer cases can be prevented. So that's about 1 in 3. So the next question, if you like, it's a bonus question. How might you reduce your risk? So what ways can you reduce your risk of cancer?
Screening.
Like lifestyle and health related stuff.
Right.
So obviously like stopping smoking, not drinking as much, having like regular exercise, eating well.
Yeah. So lifestyle risk factors, and somebody said screening as well. Absolutely, yeah. So the things, I think you got all of those kind of Jasmine there. Some of them might feel like Sunsafe might feel more appropriate for other parts of the country than Manchester, but kind of all there. What things can't we reduce our risk of? God, we mentioned one in the last kind of quiz question. Age. So none of us can affect our age, and we can't affect our genetics as well. So some risk factors that we can't control, but certainly all of these ones we kind of can control as well. It's that lifestyle kind of behavior. True or false? Survival from cancer is now better than it was 40 years ago. True or false?
Definitely true.
Yeah, of course.
Right. True. And it's kind of doubled in the past 40 years. So treatment's kind of better. We're getting more people kind of in the system kind of relative than kind of years ago. So survival is better. So that kind of, really strong messages in terms of people kind of living after and kind of living longer. Final question, I think. There are 3 national cancer screening programs, true or false?
True.
True. And what are they?
Bowel,
Michael, breast.
breast, and cervical.
Yeah, got them all. Yeah, breast, bone, cervical, or kind of cervical kind of thing. So quizzes, really easy, really good, interactive. You can get people to show hands. You can do quizzes using WhatsApp. You can do it online. You can do it on Zoom. So it's kind of a medium to raise awareness that can be used across different settings with big groups or with small groups. So kind of really good. Now, I kind of mentioned earlier about kind of 3 simple messages that we use across Answer Cancer. It's not uncommon when I kind of do work with people and kind of try to kind of support people to go out and raise awareness activities. It's not uncommon for people to kind of think, oh, I'm not a clinician. I don't know all the information. That's fine. Nobody knows all the information. Or 3 simple messages with Answer Cancer. First one relates to kind of symptoms. And it's, if it's unusual for you, see your GP. And we spend a lot of time in the NHS kind of trying to keep people out of services, when actually with cancer and kind of symptoms and early detection, we try to do the opposite and get people in kind of as soon or as quick as we can. So that's kind of the first key messages. Second key message related to that is early detection saves lives. So the sooner people kind of are into a service with a suspected cancer, the sooner kind of they can get kind of referred, they can get kind of treatment. And we know that across kind of all cancers, if caught at an earlier stage, outcomes are better. So
I'm just thinking of one of the things that somebody might say, that, you know, if cancer is, you're more at risk of cancer of 50 plus, that's when your body's changing anyway.
yeah.
So how do you know it's, you know, it's not your normal changes, or do you know if it's?
Yeah. Part of the reason why, if it's unusual for you, so all of us are kind of different. I'll give you a really strange kind of example. I did some work around bowel cancer and bowel cancer screening, and specifically targeting service users of drug and alcohol services. Now, one of the key symptoms that we talk about for bowel cancer is changes in toilet habits. And what they said was, our toilet habits change completely because we're drinking. So, you know, after a sesh, if you like, toilet habits kind of change. But that was kind of normal for them, if that kind of makes sense. Similarly, kind of, you know, for women in terms of kind of your menstrual cycle, that kind of your breasts, kind of someone's breasts kind of might change. That's normal for them. So there's something about if it's unusual for you. And then the second thing, if you've got changes around life cycles, it's not uncommon for people to pass off kind of changes that kind of, you know, we'd say go and see your GP for. It's not uncommon for people to pass off those changes as part of those things. Like, I suppose, like menopause, for example, is a really common one. So get it checked out. You know, that would be the kind of message. If it's a change, if it's not been usual for you, if you're not sure what it is, get it checked out. Better safe than sorry is kind of a, you know, a kind of a good follow-up, I think, for that one. Most of our cancer awareness campaigns, a lot of them are fronted by a doctor, and doctors want you to see them to get things checked out. The third one, and we touched upon this kind of earlier, is cancer screening saves lives. So specifically around the cancer screening programs, the evidence is very clear that taking part in regular cancer screening can in some instances help prevent cancers, but also the evidence tells us they save lives. So I'm not going to kind of spend too much kind of time on those ones. I'll tell you what, I'll just pause on that one. So the kind of the early detection, this is kind of quite interesting. So these relate to figures at stage 1. So we know that if cancers are caught, if breast cancer, for example, is spotted at, is kind of diagnosed at stage 1, 98% of women, or kind of people, 98% of people will kind of survive onwards. So it's a 98% survival rate if caught at stage 1, 95 for bowel, 95 for cervical. So the message is really clear. There's a really high survival rate for cancers if caught at stage 1. It's when people go in at later stages that it kind of becomes trickier, and those survival rates or treatment is kind of different. So 3 key messages, quick check-in for me there. We've kind of gone through those kind of quite quickly. How confident do you feel about kind of those 3 messages?
Yeah, they're quite straightforward and common sense in a way.
Yeah. And kind of good, you know, those 3 messages are good to be kind of sharing across any communications that you kind of use as well. If you run campaigns, it's good to kind of keep those key messages as well. Right, that's kind of great. So we kind of spend a little bit kind of time now. So this is kind of the second kind of, if you like, kind of focus that you might want to dwell upon in your awareness raising activity. So it's kind of cancer screening. And we kind of talked earlier about there being 3 national cancer screening programs. Sometimes people think there are other screening programs, and quite often kind of people might ask, why isn't there kind of a prostate one? So screening programs, the national screening programs, means they're kind of offered through the National Health Service. And cancer screening, what they kind of do is it screens a healthy population. So that means that it doesn't wait until you have symptoms. If you're eligible for that particular screening program, you will be sent an invite, whether you're well or not, kind of unwell. kind of quite literally looks for signs of cancer in people without symptoms.
Can I ask a question?
Of course you can.
I mean, how much does one of these tests cost? I just find that interesting, the screening test.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer to that. And I'm kind of imagining that some of those screening tests will differ, because obviously one of them you take yourself at home. The other two kind of involves kind of going to a screening team with staff who kind of do it as well. To give you a very different example, so it's not a screening program, although in Greater Manchester we are doing a pilot around lung screening. So lung screening can work by doing a chest X-ray. That's kind of pittance. The chest X-ray is kind of, you know, pittance in terms of its kind of actual kind of cost. So yeah, but I suppose
sometimes people take up things because it's, do you know how much it costs, and that kind of thing. You're getting it for nothing.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point. They're all free. So all the national screening programs are free, recommended by kind of doctors. The evidence tells us they work. To some greater or lesser degree, they are all, you know, relatively painless and relatively easy as well. And some of these are kind of some of the messages that you'd kind of share beforehand. The big one with kind of with the screening, or kind of these, I don't know if my mouse will kind of show there, but it can help with find signs of cancer before they turn into cancer themselves or something more serial. They can find it early when treatment is kind of easier, and they save lives as well. So what
do you know
I
with the one that they do at home, is that the bowel cancer one?
Yes, yeah, the bowel cancer screening one.
So is there a way that we could have, like, you know, the package that they would get if they were going home? Is there a way we could have that to sort of show people?
So unfortunately there isn't for the bowel cancer screening kit. It would make it really easy, and the one of the reasons why they're like gold dust to get hold of is because each bowel cancer screening kit is barcoded for a patient. And I think in the past what's happened is some quote unquote dummy packs were then returned. They got into the system. So that's kind of one of the reasons. But there are kind of ways around that, which I'll kind of talk about.
No, that's fine.
Now, when I kind of do sometimes what I do with kind of groups is the first thing I might do is have a bit of a group discussion to talk about barriers. And so what are the barriers? Why don't people go for screening? So I've done this where I kind of either break people into groups to talk about it on tables or in pairs. And I ask people to kind of talk about what the barriers are, or what are some of the reasons people should go for screening, and you can kind of get people to kind of come back. That's a really nice activity. You can pose those questions kind of online as well. So it's something you can kind of do with online kind of sessions. So I just do that kind of generally. If you want to be really structured, what I'm kind of showing you on the screen here is what's called an H tool. And I love the H tool because it's just a very structured way with groups you can get them to kind of talk about a topic. And it's called the H tool because on a bit of flip chart, you just put a big H, and down one side, in this example, you talk about what stops people going for screening. On the other side, you put what helps. If you want to get people to write it on flip charts, it's quite good because you can kind of move them about. So this is just a nice way to structure a group discussion. If you're feeling really confident, I turn that middle bar, the middle bit of the H, into what you call it, a scale. So you mark down how confident you feel on either kind of 1 or 10. So you get people kind of talking about it. If you want to be really kind of push the group, you ask the group to come to a consensus about that. So rather than having 5 X's across that scale, you get the group to come to a consensus, and that encourages them to talk and discuss it with each others, and where they put their cross. And then I use the bottom of it, just to put questions. So if your group, have you got any questions, just write them here. So if you're doing face-to-face work, if we're lucky enough to continue to be able to do that next year, that's another way you can get people talking about kind of barriers. And kind of, you know, is that I found that kind of really nice because it kind of gets out kind of two sets of kind of insight and knowledge in the room. First thing it kind of can get out there is some myths or misinformation, or as well as kind of what people consider, you know, real barriers that they have. And then the other thing it gets out into the room is it gets other people's experiences. So you sometimes get people talking about it and challenging each other as well. So in a group and kind of, more generally, when we talk about barriers to screening, these are just some of the ones I've kind of put down and kind of, things that we need to kind of acknowledge. So I wouldn't describe them as systemic barriers with kind of groups, but for us in this room, there's a whole host of different barriers that communities and different communities kind of face, which kind of might be around language barriers, accessibility, childcare. We talked earlier about kind of smear tests and kind of mums and so on. There's a lot of support out there for kind of people to help them kind of go for their kind of screen, but you kind of have to ask for it. So for example, you can get kind of information in additional languages, but you have to ask for it. If it's your kind of first, or if you're kind of nervous about going for your smear, they kind of staff can acknowledge that and kind of give you slightly longer appointment times, but you have to kind of ask for it. Even down to with bowel screening, it is possible to kind of get some additional kit to kind of help you kind of do it. So like, but you have to kind of ask for it as well. That's kind of in terms of collecting your poo sample. So there is stuff out there, but you have to ask for it. And that can be kind of an important message to kind of to chat about with people. So all those systemic barriers, for want of a kind of a better phrase, not talking about it with each other. So not talking about it is, I did some research a few years ago in Greater Manchester at bowel screening and cervical screening. And with bowel screening, I'd kind of talked to a husband, and I'd talk to his kind of partner, his wife, and I'd kind of ask them separately, do you talk to each other about doing your screen, your bowel cancer screening kit? And it was probably more common they didn't talk about it, even with each other, which I found kind of wonderful. Well, I say wonderful, I found it amazing. Because the influence we have on each other just by talking about it can be significant. I went home and I kind of saw on my mum's mantelpiece that I recognised a bowel cancer screening envelope you kind of return, and I said, "Have you done your kit?" Mm-hmm. And my mum said, "Oh no," she said, "I've done them all now, and I'm not going to do that one. It must have been her last one she was coming up to." She said, "No, I'm not going to do it." And I said, "This is my job to do this and to get people to return their screening kit." And I had my work bag, so I happened to pull out a leaflet that I had there, and I kind of gave her it. Now, obviously, my influence as a son is probably a bit different, but I could, she took it. And the next time I went home, I said to her, "Did you do your kit?" And she said, "Yeah, I did it." So, those opportunities to talk and prompt each other, or partners, or parents, or family, or friends, really, really important, kind of really important. And that's the job of awareness raising. To talk about it with each other, to kind of, to nudge and encourage people to do it. Has anyone got kind of any questions or anything else you kind of want to add to this bit kind of here? It's something we'd go into in more depth in longer sessions. Cultural barriers. I did some work with it was a Jewish team in Broughton kind of a wee while ago, and it's certainly not specific to some Jewish communities. It's kind of I suppose beliefs or ideas I've kind of seen in other communities, but kind of with this kind of one particular kind of communities, I suppose kind of a little bit kind of fatalistic, or it's kind of it is in God's hands. If kind of that is his design for us, then kind of that's his kind of design for us. Now, what was so that kind of, I suppose, cultural or kind of some kind of faith-based kind of barriers can be there. And what was really lovely with that team is they kind of said, actually, kind of it is also part of our faith to be a shining light. So we have to live our life to be kind of a shining light for kind of God. So we have to be, for want of a better word, responsible and kind of in our kind of dealings in our life. And what they kind of did with that barrier, it was kind of flipped. Does that make sense? They flipped it around and said, well, actually, it's part. So understanding some of those barriers sometimes helps us come up with kind of different solutions as well. And this kind of, exercise helps each other talk about the barriers and what kind of solutions there might be. Because they're legitimate kind of barriers for kind of people in some communities. So different ways to answer. At its most simple, these are the kind of the ones that we've touched upon earlier. Screening saves lives. Screening can help detect changes, prevent change before things turn into cancer. And then also some very practical ones, which I've kind of found quite useful over kind of my time. So we emphasize the quick and easy. So, that's something we say to people. It's kind of quick and easy. With some of the screening programs, it's important, particularly with smears, to reinforce that it's kind of female staff. They pretty much always are, but you can ask someone if you're kind of nervous or unsure. You can go with a friend. Staff are experts. Staff have seen it, done it, have loads of experience of relaxing you, putting you at ease, answering your questions. And then that kind of other bit, I kind of almost touched upon it with the final example, is the influence of others. So, whether that's kind of rabbis or kind of family members, there are people who have influence on us and each other. So kind of emphasize the influence of others kind of where appropriate. So does that make sense for kind of that bit?
Yes, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, in some of your activities, you might have opportunity to go into that. And other ones you kind of won't. It will depend what your awareness raising kind of session is. But you use the room and their experiences, because quite often people will, come with kind of information or challenges or reassure others as well. So that kind of leads us on to, I suppose, the kind of other topic that you might be kind of talking about. So specifically, the 3 national cancer screening programs. So I'll go through them kind of all bit by bit, pause at each and kind of ask you to fill in the gaps, as it were. So breast screening, or sometimes called your mammogram. So based upon your knowledge or experience, what is it? How does it work? So tell me about breast screening.
Well, it's not as scary as it sounds.
Right.
And it's not as painful either.
Right. Who's it for?
Women.
Right. What age?
It can be for men though, can't it? Or is that only if there is a problem detected?
Right. So the national kind of screening program is for, I suppose, kind of people with kind of significant breast screen. It will depend upon kind of your marker, so kind of how you are registered at your GPs as to whether you are kind of called or not. So if you are registered at your GPs as female, then you will be called for breast screening. Similarly, you'll be called for cervical screening. So not to kind of get kind of too complicated. So that means kind of as a rule, kind of, I was going to say you'll be called if you have breast tissue. It doesn't work like that. You'll be invited to, depending on how you record at your GPs. So not to kind of get kind of too complicated. If you are a trans man, so whether you do or don't have kind of breast tissue, if you're a trans man, you will be called if you are still registered at your GPs as female. So that's the important thing, which will get you kind of invited or not. So the kind of...
Actually, I didn't mean that actually.
Right.
I just meant, obviously, there are cases of men having breast tissue, obviously, who can get breast cancers. So would there be a time, or that's obviously further on once something's been detected, men would not be called just for a screening as such?
So men won't be called for the mammogram at all. So you're right about kind of men kind of are affected by breast cancer. It's around about 300 to 400, I think, off the top of my head, cases every year, compared with the tens of thousands of cases. So it's much smaller, but kind of men definitely can. And we had a guy talk at one of our events recently about his experience of being a man with breast cancer. So it's important for men to be breast aware, actually, of both their own and kind of their partner's kind of breast as well, because again, we've known cases where kind of changes in kind of a woman's breast have been spotted by their partner. So men being breast aware can be quite important of their kind of own, but they're not routinely called for mammograms. No. People who are between the ages of 50 and 70, so women, and also included in that would be trans or non-binary people who are registered at their GPs. It's every 3 years. If you're over the age of 70, you can request screening. So even though you're kind of outside the age range, you can request to be kind of it can be kind of maintained. And typically you need to go to a breast screening service, which will either be in a hospital or it will be in a car park, kind of somewhere like that. And it kind of looks like that. So and I'll send out kind of with you in the slide deck. There's videos for the different screening programs that may or may not be useful as well. So the mammogram kind of takes kind of a screen of kind of the breast, which is kind of put in between kind of the plates. Bowel cancer screening. So we touched upon this one earlier. I think, was it Jasmine or Courtney? Jasmine, you kind of talked about kind of this one. So who's bowel cancer screening for and how does it work?
It's the kit. Is it for men and women?
Yeah. The only screening program that men are invited to be part of, as a rule.
And it's a little box that gets sent to your house.
Yeah, so it's also the one that you do at home in the privacy of your own home. Any idea of ages?
It's 60 onwards.
Right. It certainly was 60 to 74. So the government announced, was it last year or this year? The government have announced a reduction in the age range. And at the moment, kind of clearing COVID backlog before they move to kind of lowering ages. So at some point next year, we expect the age to come down to 56. And then longer term, the ambition is to bring that age down lower. But certainly at the moment right now, men and women aged 60 and over will be sent the kit every 2 years. And as you've kind of said, it's completed at home. And the way kind of this particular kind of screening works is it tests literally for invisible bits of blood in your kind of poo as well. So I'll kind of just bring up, I think on the next slide, have I got one? That's a video, which I'm not going to go to. Yeah, that's what it looks like. I often describe it as being a bit like a mascara. So the kind of kit comes through the post, comes with kind of a letter in advance, comes with instructions on it. That kind of the bit in the middle, which kind of it looks like a stick on a funny kind of funny thing. That's where you kind of take the sample. There you go. And the tricky bit with this, as it were, the tricky bit is getting how you collect your poo. And it kind of gives instructions. So you have to kind of, kind of collect your poo, and you have to kind of do that without it kind of coming into contact with water. So the easiest way that kind of is recommended is to use a clean kind of Tupperware dish. Nothing from kind of meat, because you kind of, in the olden days with the old kit, you got cross contamination. So you kind of want a clean kind of bit of Tupperware, and you use that to kind of collect your poo, and you take kind of one, it's less of a sample and more of a dab really. And that's all it is. Take one sample and you kind of put it back in kind of this container, put it back in the box, and it's free post and it's sent off. And you kind of notice just kind of from language as well, when talking about it, you will suss out your room and you will suss out the most appropriate language to use. I tend to talk about poo. I'm kind of really used to kind of doing that. I tend to find myself that kind of communities, using nobody ever uses the word stool samples in real life, and yet sometimes we think we have to always flip into that. You'll judge your room. I've sat in rooms of the poshest older ladies in Sefton, and we've talked about poo and collecting it. Judge your audience kind of what's appropriate for them. Has anyone got any questions about kind of that before we move on to the next one? No. As I say, obviously, this is one that you would engage men in kind of particular. So that kind of brings us to cervical screening, sometimes kind of called your smear test. So what's this and how does it work?
So it's where it's for women, and they go along to clinics or the little pop-up caravans. I don't know what to call them, pop-up things. And they go and have an internal test. Yeah.
So what age are you invited?
It's from 25 and onwards. I only know that because I turned 25 and I got my letter.
Yeah. Did you get it quite close to your birthday?
I've got it this month, and my birthday is in May, so it's quite a good backlog.
Yeah, it kind of, it often comes around. You'd be surprised how often screening invites come around people's birthdays, and people that sometimes can be good or bad. I know that sometimes if they get kind of one of these, like the bowel kit, when you hit 60, for example, people are like, oh, getting old. And that can be a disincentive, you know, to be honest with you, for some people. So yeah, cervical screening, sometimes called your smear test. So you are invited between the ages of 25 to 49 every 3 years. And then after 49, so 50 to 64, you're invited every 5 years. So this one's slightly different in terms of how often you are invited. The smear test, so cervical screening kind of now, it's a test that will detect HPV, that human papilloma virus. So in the olden days, I think it was called smear because kind of literally people would kind of look, Scientology kind of look through slides, whereas kind of modern day test is kind of slightly different. And it's carried out at GPs. It used to be carried out more universally at sexual health clinics, what you used to call as family or contraception clinics. That doesn't happen at the moment, but I think there are plans to kind of maybe reintroduce it back as an offer through some of those kind of clinics, because obviously you're reaching kind of more women that way. So yeah,
are they happening at the moment, or is everything shut down?
No, definitely happening. So all the screening programs are all kind of, there was a slight pause for some of them across kind of last year, but they're all kind of open, and people kind of being invited and working hard to clear backlogs if there are kind of backlogs. You know, there are kind of particular kind of precautions in place, obviously, that you kind of find when going to your GPs or other kind of services, but absolutely your GP wants you to come for your smear. That's kind of still the case. So this is kind of, you know, there's a basic kind of information about all of them. It's probably worthwhile touching upon the HPV, the human papilloma virus. So this is kind of important because it is the cause of most cervical cancers. So the vaccine that is now offered to kind of young boys and young girls and young boys, so it's offered at school, the HPV vaccine, and that vaccine protects, I'm kind of doing that kind of show my arm. So that vaccine offers protection against cervical cancer and some of the other cancers as well, because the virus is also linked to an increased risk for some other cancers, including oral cancers and anal cancers as well. So you kind of might get, you know, some discussion about that. People kind of asking, oh, I've had, you know, kind of my HPV vaccine. Do I really need to go for a smear? Yes, you do. You kind of definitely do. You know, of kind of all of the kind of ones, I think sometimes the smear cervical screening is one that kind of produces kind of a lot of barriers, you know, kind of, and whether they're kind of cultural or kind of beliefs around, I'm not sexually active, I don't have sex with men, for example, on top of the practical arrangements of having to go for it. You know, it's kind of one of the more invasive kind of screens that we kind of have. So the smear or kind of cervical screening, that one sometimes takes a bit of discussion. And as I've kind of said, we've seen declining kind of uptake amongst all ages, but younger women in particular with that one. We have done for a number of years. And certainly before COVID, we were at a 20-year low for cervical screening.
Can I ask, sort of blood tests for this sort of thing, are they very expensive, or does it not happen? Do they not work?
So, so at the moment, one of the other things just to be aware of, so there is a pilot, so it's a research program that's taking place across Greater Manchester. Greater Manchester is one of the sites. It's happening in other parts of the country, and you might have read about it on the news, or seen on the news, where they are using blood tests to see if they can detect markers for cancer at an earlier stage. So that's called the Galileo trial. I'm sure I'm saying that kind of not right, but there's certainly a pilot. And if you drive past, I saw, for example, in the car park of Tesco's in Salford last week, it's a huge, big mobile unit. So some people over the age of 50 will be invited to be part of that blood test trial. And that's really exciting because as a screening program, you can imagine in the future, if that can be offered as a screening program, it'd be brilliant that we can detect a lot of blood markers for a whole host of different cancers. So the technology is changing, but at the moment, obviously those three ones the cervical screen, the bowel cancer screen, and the breast screen are the ones. So you probably get kind of lots of questions, about this one, or lots of kind of discussions. Again, don't need to be experts. I'm going to show you kind of where you can kind of get kind of an Answer Cancer fact sheet, which gives you the basic information about each of those screening programs. I'll show you where you can get videos, which kind of tell you a lot. It might be in your kind of in your work. You might get some, I don't know, you might be getting some experts, or you might get local nurses or kind of practitioners or staff who can come and help you with kind of awareness sessions. You might have doctors or nurses or kind of people as part of your team as well. So, kind of think about those as a resource you can have. There are, as I mentioned earlier, additional support and information for you, but you typically kind of have to kind of ask for it. There's a lot of information out there kind of for kind of BAME communities, translated materials, information in accessible formats. And I've kind of put a link there for kind of one of them for you. On our Answer Cancer website, so when that website I showed you, it kind of had resources. There's a series of resources in there that will kind of take you at a click of a button to some of that additional support. And I've put a screenshot in there of cervical screening. So we've got a resource where if you click on it, it'll take you to some of those videos. It says soon to be uploaded. They are uploaded. They're up there at the moment. There's some information there in alternative languages. So it's just, we can give you prompts and kind of tell you, show you where to go. So you're not kind of wondering where to go for some of that kind of information. There is also, should it be touched upon, some specialist clinics. So there are some kind of communities who might need additional support. So FGM, for example, we in the MRI in Manchester, we've got kind of a specialist clinic there for people who've experienced sexual violence, and these ones are specifically around cervical screening. There's a support, you have to go to London or Glasgow, and then again for trans non-binary people, there's a London-based clinic as well. So there are specialized clinics. You don't need to know kind of the detail other than, they are kind of out there. And if you've got this slide deck, you kind of know where to go. So that was a really quick kind of run through screening programs. Have you got any kind of questions kind of here or now kind of about them, or?
No, Adrian, I was just going to ask you, and presumably you've done some research or into numbers. Why are numbers so low for young women taking up cervical screening, do you think?
I can tell you what the evidence suggests, but I'm going to throw it out to the room. Why do the rest? So this is what you were doing in an awareness session. If you've got, so you throw it back to the room. So what does anyone have any ideas about that?
I think it can be a fear, like as a young woman. I mean, I've had a lot of other tests done before that are quite similar, so I'm not as scared about it. But for, say, a woman who's not had any test before, had no swab test, nothing along those lines, it's quite an intimate area and it could make them like quite uncomfortable.
Yeah,
I agree with you. Sorry, I'm obviously just trying to think what other people think. I agree with you, except it's been that way always, but numbers have reduced. And I think that the generation, my daughter and, your age group, Jasmine, are much more sexually aware, open-minded, aware of mental health, emotional well-being. So it seems unusual that actually the numbers would be lower rather than higher.
I think nobody wants to go to a stuffy GP.
Yeah.
They can't, but it's actually where it is as well, and what that implies. It's almost like it's not cool going to those places.
Such a shame, isn't it?
I mean, the reasons you've kind of mentioned, I think, are very kind of valid. So there will be all of the other reasons that kind of influence that decision making, like the emotional reaction to it. It's not the most pleasant thing in the world. I'm led to believe some of our campaigns, for example, there's one campaign called It's Pants, but it might save your life. So, it's not the best thing. It's not the most enjoyable thing you'll ever do in your life, but it's certainly one of the most important protective kind of things you can do. So I think the usual kind of reasons apply there. I think for some younger women, even those who are what we'd call have quite high health literacy, who are quite clued up about things, If you kind of are registered at your university and you move away, so it's a different GP, for example, might affect kind of for some women. So even if you're kind of quite savvy about your health, it might be that practically your lifestyle changes. A lot of younger women will use that. So are really used to making appointments online. And it sounds like a very simple thing, but if you're not used to ringing up the GP and you're not used to ringing up at 8 in the morning and having to be a bit persistent, for example, then that can be kind of a barrier for some people. You kind of mentioned, you know, that it's a new procedure. You tend not to have much of a relationship with your GP unless it's for contraception or sexual health. That doesn't tend to happen till later. So again, a lot of younger women aren't used to going to their GPs as well. So that might be a reason.
Do you not think there's a bit of misinformation out there? I don't know if any of you are on TikTok, but at the minute I've seen a lot of like misinformation spread, and I've seen this video that's circulating quite a lot, and it's saying that like they take like a piece of your cervix out, and it's freaking a lot of young girls out.
Right. So I didn't know that. So that would be massive information.
A lot of views, like a lot of women and people are like sharing it and sort of chatting about it.
I mean, the other thing is, this is not a simple test if you think about it. If you it really is invasive, and it's affecting a kind of your whole psyche in a sense. So there's an assumption that that's an easy step to take, but it's not. And why would you put yourself in a vulnerable position? And I'm thinking, as a young person, you're going along to somewhere that's unfamiliar, older people that that are like your parents. Why would you have them prodding?
As well, they could be like a victim of sexual assault. There's it's sexual harassment, and that's quite common. So if someone has experienced that, the likelihood of them letting a stranger near that region is just going to be like nothing.
It's go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say all those influences have always been there. If I look at my age group, my mum wouldn't have discussed it necessarily. Should have mentioned it, but there would have been no detail around it. But it certainly with my peer group, it's an assumption that you do go. It's not even a question of not going. And people were still being sexually abused, unfortunately. People were still scared. People were still awkward, fearful. I think, Jasmine, you make a really good point about social media, because that's how the dangerous messages are spreading so far, so quickly. And we need to combat that. So part of the awareness that we're delivering, I think, should also be not just to the individuals, but to spread the word to their children who won't be ready for testing, but to get that conversation going.
We're massive on social media here, and that's something we're going to be pushing for. We do a lot of like TikToks, videos, social media awareness. So I'm more than happy to share that with everyone if anyone wants to do that, any posts that we do.
I think that would be brilliant, and that's kind of really important. And when they have ran a national campaign around increasing uptake around smears and cervical screening, it's kind of worked, and you've seen kind of really positive results. We did that in Greater Manchester about 3 or 4 years ago, and it had kind of positive results. Joe's Trust did some kind of insights, kind of asked women kind of what some of the barriers were, and embarrassment, body image. I'm embarrassed about my body was a really significant kind of barrier for women, and it may be that that kind of might be linked to kind of, I suppose, kind of changes, or how younger women kind of view themselves, how they kind of judge themselves kind of against their peers. But all of those kind of reasons, all of those kind of barriers, the kind of the things to kind of for us to think about in terms of simple messages are to talk about prevention, so to talk about risk, to talk about prevention. So cervical screening will detect changes before they turn into cancer. It's very much kind of a preventative, important kind of part of kind of well-being and being health. Talk about it being, relatively quick and easy. So the actual procedure itself is relatively quick and easy. Talk about kind of experienced staff who will help you relax and feel at ease. Talk about going with a friend. So there's some of those kind of, the importance and benefits of it, but then also, addressing some of the concerns about the practicalities of it in particular as well. Take a friend, take a CD, If you want to take a CD, look at me, that's probably old and out of date now, isn't it? We used to say to people, take a CD that you can kind of play. Take your iPhone, or, you know, you can kind of play as well. It's about relaxing and, you know.
I think just one more point as well. I've got the most gorgeous nurse one of the nurses at our GP surgery is fantastic. And I have recommended her to anybody I know. It's a surgery that serves a huge community. And word of mouth, just saying, oh, don't see that one, she's a bit rough. But this one, she's a young nurse and she's fabulous. You know, actually have a bit of a laugh and a chat beforehand.
Yeah.
And that completely puts people more at ease as much as you can be.
I think anecdotes, we talked about kind of testimony, anecdotes, you know, are really important and humanizing kind of examples of how you can help kind of raise awareness. Like when I threw in me going home to kind of talk to my mum, something like that, your experience there, that example, Dalia, with I remember reading on Mumsnet an example of a woman who said, I was going for my smear, dropped my kids off with the grandma. I was quite glad because I had kind of the morning and afternoon without me kids, went for my smear, and she said the doctor said to her, oh, you've made an effort. And I thought, it's a strange thing to say. She said, I got home and she said, I realized when I'd left the house, I grabbed my daughter's flannel to give myself a quick rub. I'd cover myself in glitter. That's a nice story that sometimes I can, you know, things like that kind of, you know, we'll share. So all of those things help with raising awareness, and that humanizing, nudging, you know, that's how people kind of relate to kind of stories like that. People relate to kind of stories. So that kind of brings us kind of, I think, kind of nicely into some quick ways. And there's a different training session. So the other short session that we offer grantees, which was kind of, I can't remember what we've called it, but it's something like creative and engaging ways. It goes into this in much more kind of detail. Can I
ask a quick question?
Yeah, of course you can.
Just on the pilot for the blood tests and the markers, can people opt into that? Is that
no? So it's by invitation. So you're sent a letter. Yeah. So kind of depending on who and where and what, you're sent a letter for that one. So for kind of interactive or creative approaches, this is kind of about kind of, you know, ditching the script, I've kind of called it, but it's also thinking about, you know, depending upon where you are doing this and who you are doing it with, your approach at raising awareness might change completely. And I started off kind of by doing talking about a quiz, and I mentioned the resources that are kind of out there. So on the Answer Cancer Champion website, there's a section called resources, and when you click on there, it will kind of take you to awareness raising toolkits. So I'm just going to kind of mention these and give you some examples of what's kind of in there as well. And as I've said, the third training that was not compulsory for grantees goes through this in a lot more details. So those toolkits kind of are downloadable and or printable resources, or they tell you how to adapt them for use in different settings. And they've got a real variety of different ones that can be used across cervical screening, all screening, breast screening, bowel screening, kind of whatever, got different examples. So we tell you, for example, how to create word searches. So it tells you there's a really quick and really easy and free online program that you can type in kind of words, and it creates a crossword for you. So I've done work with reception staff a wee while ago, dentist staff, and we talked about how they might raise awareness. And I said, do a crossword. It also shows you how to make word searches as well. So you can raise awareness as people are sat waiting or in a cafe or in a reception area. You know, it's quite a direct yet kind of passive way of kind of doing it. So that's kind of one creative way. We give you examples of just some different games and approaches you can use. So these are examples of games that kind of are available on Amazon, but also on what's it called? Is it B&M? What's the bargain place? Is it B&M? Yeah, you're kind of nodding. They go through a phase every year of selling like poo emojis and poo games. So this one's Fish for Floaters, and it's based upon the idea of hook a duck. So we talk about those as kind of engagement kind of ways, poo head. And obviously some of these will be more appropriate or less appropriate depending upon your audiences. We kind of talk about things like craft as a way of kind of engaging groups and communities. So these are kind of the knitted boobs. that we've had craft groups kind of knit across Greater Manchester, and it's got links to kind of knitting patterns. And I've done work with kind of, they call themselves the knitting grannies, you know, where they literally create resources, and we had lots of conversations about things, and then there were tangible things to use on stalls. We've got quiz sheets for you. This is a cake that was baked by one of the cancer champions, one of the best cakes in the world. But I've also kind of done it where people have created bum cakes. You can kind of buy online kind of little kind of jelly things that you stick on pack on the top of a kind of 20 buns that you buy from, you know, B&M bargains. So get as creative as you kind of want, because all of these things are different ways that you can engage people and start to have conversation. There you go, fun approaches to community engagement. It's on the list of training that you were kind of sent out. We just go into that in a little bit more detail. So I've gone really quickly over that. Has anyone kind of got any questions kind of about those ones? You know, what I'm doing is encouraging you, let rip with your creativity and think of a different way that will engage your different audiences at different times. Right. The bit that I suppose the other kind of thing that you might want to raise awareness about, it's kind of part of your kind of conversation. So even though we are the screening program, so we do touch upon signs and symptoms. So I said earlier that the simple message is, if it's unusual for you, see your GP. So that's the basic thing you need to kind of arm yourself with and have conversations around. If you fancy a little bit more detail, then included in your slides, I've just put kind of some of the really common symptoms that we kind of have for breast, bowel, and kind of cervical as well. So some of these you will be more familiar with than others. This one's just a different way of kind of talking about being breast aware. And one of the acronyms commonly used is that touch, look, kind of check. Again, this in particular is one, you know, if a change is not right for you, whether it's unusual, you know, some kind of, well, it's really common for women to have different kind of size kind of breasts, for them to kind of change across kind of the month and so on. So if it's not right for you, you would never wait until your next screening invite to get something checked out. If you have a change that's not right for you, you would go and get it checked out straight away with a doctor. And then with kind of breast cancer symptoms, obviously kind of, you know, people tend to think about lumps, but what's important is kind of, you know, there's a range of different symptoms in terms of kind of not just lumps, but also kind of changes around nipple, around size, around shape, around dimpling, around discharge, and so on. So that's in your slide deck to kind of think and talk about with people, or as part of your awareness raising. For common bowel cancer screening, I've touched upon one earlier. Has anyone got any ideas what some of the common bowel cancer symptoms might be?
Changes to your poo.
Changes to your poo, yeah. Changes.
Or blood in your poo.
Yeah. So all of those may or may not be kind of symptoms. I mean, it's important to note they're much more likely to be symptoms of something else. But if it's unusual for you, kind of get it checked out. And you mentioned kind of those ones there. The one that kind of tends to be a bit more common is the kind of changes in kind of bowel habit. By the time you can see blood in your poo, it tends to be a little bit later. So that could be a later stage sign. The tests look for microscopic instances of kind of blood. So all of these may be symptoms that you should get kind of checked out as well. And then common cervical cancer symptoms. Anyone got any ideas about those?
There's quite a few. So is it like change in discharge, like bleeding for longer periods of time, or not bleeding at all, just changing like texture or shape of like the outside?
Right. So these are kind of common ones. So they tend to be kind of vaginal bleeding. So that tends to be kind of the first sign, and kind of, I suppose, when you're not expecting it. So whether that's kind of after sex, between kind of periods, kind of pain. You talked about kind of discharge as well. But the kind of what is most common is no symptoms. So cervical cancer can be unsymptomatic, which again kind of reinforces the importance of having regular checkups and regular kind of smear tests as well. So what, you know, I'd say, don't get too hung up on the detail of symptoms. Have, you know, that level is probably good to have in your head, but the key message is back to, if something's not right for you, if it's unusual for you, go and see your GP. That's kind of where you kind of need to kind of reinforce. Chances are it'll be something else, but early detection saves lives. So if we catch cancer, if it's detected at an earlier stage, survival is and treatment options are much better. So it's that prevention, early detection message that we want to kind of share with people as well. So that's pretty much the big kind of run through the content of kind of awareness sessions and some of the different ways you kind of might do it. I started off by touching on evaluation, and I said Khaled's kind of he's been looking at me kind of doing this today. But with evaluation, really important, because obviously as part of your grants kind of application and award, we are going to ask you to submit a little bit of reporting. So depending upon your project, there'll be a midpoint kind of reporting and an end of project reporting. It's really simple. When you go to the first sessions, I think on next week, you'll probably get a bit more, you may get a bit more detail about this. So when you're doing awareness raising activity, just think about, how am I going to show how good this has been? How am I going to show the impact of this as well? So build in a bit of an evaluation. And Khaled goes through this in much more detail in his training. So he'll be kind of talking about this. So all I'm going to kind of say, or all I'm going to kind of talk to you at this point is, you know, plan it in. So think about it beforehand. Having a helper there kind of helps, because it's somebody to deal with either paperwork or kind of what kind of activity you're doing at a kind of an awareness session. You're going to be recording. You're going to be kind of thinking about, am I measuring? Do I want to see if there's been a change in knowledge or awareness as part of my awareness raising? So that's one of the things you want to do. Has somebody, as a result of doing this awareness raising, has their awareness raised changed or their knowledge changed? That's kind of one thing. Behaviors is like, it's like the Holy Grail, you know, that's kind of what we want to show. Has somebody acted upon this awareness? And you might kind of pull that out with kind of case studies that might come back afterwards. It's usually something that happens after. It could be years in advance. So that's tricky, but that's kind of, you know, not impossible. You might be kind of evaluating the process, the experience. So if you're doing an awareness raising session, you might just ask people, how was it? Did you like it? Did you enjoy it? Did you learn something? Or you might be kind of measuring who you're speaking to. So that's kind of who was in the room. Was it lots of women, lots of men, lots of old people, lots of young people, lots of white people, lots of people from BAME communities? You know, can you find out something about who you reached? So you know you're reaching some of those communities from target areas or from target communities. So Khaled will go through all of this in kind of a bit more detail and talk about some practical kind of top tips and suggestions. So it doesn't need to be form filling. It can be, you know, raising hands. You'll have some practical suggestions about how you can kind of do it. But I just wanted to include that in this session for you as a reminder, and it'll kind of be in the kind of slide deck. So that kind of takes us, we're kind of at the kind of end, and there's one thing I would like you to do in terms of thinking about a plan, a small plan. So hopefully at the end of today, this kind of quick run through is giving you some different ideas. Hopefully it's kind of giving you some key messages, some simple key messages that we'd like you to reinforce through your awareness activity. We, you know, will be here to provide support and help you kind of do kind of your work. And from the sounds of it, you've got some pretty interesting plans kind of ahead of you. So that's kind of good. What I'd like you to do now is to think about a plan. And this is going to link into the plans that you've kind of got already. So if you've got your phones there, you've got your smartphone, you should all be used to QR codes now. So if you kind of point your phone at the screen and kind of click on it, It should take you to our planning form. That's all I want you to do now. I don't want you to kind of start filling that in. But what we do with our plans, we kind of say to people, think of a plan, something you're going to do as a result of this training. And I'll share this link in the follow-up email as well. And we will follow up in a month's time and remind you about your plan. We'll send you an email saying, hey, Roxana, you said you were going to do this. That's all we'll do. And in 3 months' time, we'll send you another email just to say, how did it go? So for us, this is a really good way of evaluating, but it's also a good way to kind of keep nudging you into doing something as well. Now I'm going to stop sharing because we're kind of pretty bang on. I want to leave a few minutes for questions. Has anyone got any that really quick run through awareness raising in kind of short space of time?
No, it went quite fast actually.
Have you kind of got, are you starting to think about some kind of ideas, or is that kind of, you must have from your applications, do you?
I know in our application we've said we're going to do like a podcast, we're going to do like an explainer video. So I tend to create training for people with learning disabilities.
Right.
So what I'll have to do is translate this, that's a lot more easy read, and then we normally do a training booklet from that. And then we'll do like a video alongside it, which we'll probably be happy to share with you guys as well once it's completed.
Amazing.
And we've got loads planned really. As I've been thinking, there's a gentleman we've got in our service who is a staff member who's recently recovered from testicular cancer. And I know he's very up for spreading awareness and showing all the guys what to do, to check. So I just wrote his name down while we were talking, and I'm going to get in touch with him, see if he'll be a little champion for us. So I'm quite excited about that.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And so on the kind of the resource section I told you on the Answer Cancer website, there will be links there. There'll be I think it's called the accessibility kind of toolkit or resource. There should be links there to if you haven't got them already, resources for people with learning disabilities as well.
Brilliant, yeah, I'll have a look.
There's tons of stuff out there. It's just that hopefully you can grab and not always have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.